Just before Talk TV launched, there was also the arrival of GB News. You remember their launch was plagued with technical difficulties and political differences that ultimately saw the departure of flagship presenter Andrew Neil. And more recently, Ofcom have found the channel to be in breach of their code multiple times, including this weekend when they weighed in on the saga of Lawrence Fox's misogynistic rant about journalist Ava Evans. That controversy saw Fox and the presenter who indulged him, Dan Wootton, dismissed. Despite these issues, GB News has enjoyed significantly more viewers than the likes of Talk TV over the last 2 years. But while they've done so, they've also made huge losses. Last year, the channel ran a deficit of over £30 million. And today, GB News announced that figure had risen by 38% to £42.4 million. That's just in the last 12 months, meaning since its launch in 2021, the channel has lost £76 million. Imagine what we could do with that here at Novara Media. 76 million. That's not their spend, that's what they've lost. Now, the owner of GB News is a company called All Perspectives, over a third of which is owned by this guy, Paul Marshall, a hedge fund tycoon who's also presently trying to buy The Telegraph. It's reported that Marshall's All Perspectives has injected GB News with a further £41 million of funding. In other words, it looks like Marshall is funding GB News at a major personal loss. Now, he might think those losses will fall, and they probably will. After all, the channel is growing. Its revenues increased by 80% to over £6 million last year. But it's hard to believe he thinks he'll get his money back. Kieran, do you think Paul Marshall will be concerned at these kinds of losses? £76 million in 2.5 years is really something.
Well, I don't know how rich Paul Marshall is, but I do have a theory about some elements of the ultra or super rich, one that I can't prove at all, which is that they enjoy plunging their money into ventures like this. Some of them enjoy the losses, I suspect, that they can be so profligate and insulated from the consequences of their profligacy, I think gives them a thrill. It reminds me of, there's a largely forgotten economics tract from the late 19th century by a chap called Torsten Veblen, I've probably pronounced that wrong, called The Theory of the Leisure Class. And he talks about this very specific thing, very rich people engaging in what he called conspicuous consumption, and part of that being losing lots and lots of money on ventures. So I suppose some of that is maybe going on. I don't know how rich Paul Marshall is, and I don't know what type of personality he has, but it's possible. Another thing I would say is, on a more serious note, I would assume that at a certain point he thought that he would get a return on investment, either financially or ideologically. And I think it's arguable, given GB News survived its initial major teething problems and will probably be with us for some while longer, it's arguable that in ideological terms, he's achieved that return on investment, in that he's managed to get all of the strangest barnyard ideas housed under one roof and have it all aired there.
Yes, I've got some thoughts on this. I don't doubt for 1 second. This is something that GB News people would say. They would say that, look, yes, the press in this country is quite right-wing, but the broadcast media is to the left of the press. It's got quite a liberal bias. I agree with that. I've seen the BBC, Sky, Channel 4. I've seen them up close and personal, kind of like New Labour vibes. That's generally the default politics of people in broadcast. And they would say, look, we're trying to correct that a little bit. And we want to represent people who are otherwise unrepresented in broadcast media. Forget the fact that Nigel Farage has been on BBC Question Time more than anybody else. Okay, well, that's a coherent argument. I don't entirely dismiss it. But again, imagine if you had a left-wing news channel which could lose, in 2.5 years, £76 million. You could effectively burn money. Do you know how popular you could make left-wing ideas? I mean, I actually think with a budget of a fraction of that, you could be more influential than the BBC. And I'm not joking, And I say that as somebody who's part of an organization which has 700,000 subscribers on YouTube. Okay, we're not the BBC, but I have some idea of how the media works. to spend that much money, you can get a hell of a lot of influence. One to think about. While investors are more than happy to pour millions into newspapers and TV channels that advance a certain agenda, one that favours the elite, us here at Novara Media don't have massive investors that bankroll our whole operation, and we never received a giant sum of seed capital to get started. In fact, we started with precisely £0. Instead, we rely on donations from our audience, and our supporters are the reason this organisation has grown. As I said, we now have over 700,000 subscribers here on YouTube, and the average monthly donation we received last year was just £6. So when we say we're people-powered, we mean it. We're working hard to provide coverage that centres the majority of society who are regularly ignored by legacy media. So if you're in a position to support our work, then head over to novaramedia.com/support and become a supporter today. A big thank you to all of you who already support us each and every month. Our work would be impossible without you. That link again, if you need it, is in the description box below.